The jury process settings are the settings that control how your jurors will jury in and out your works. Now, there's a few important settings in most all of these categories, so we highly encourage you to watch each video for each of these sections to make sure you get your jurying just right. Now, the jury end date, the first one here, is the date that your users will be notified that their jurying should be completed by. So your users will submit entries and they're always anxious to know, am I in or am I out? So this jury date tells them you have to wait till at least this date and then you'll be able to find out. Now, these settings down here control which pieces of information are shown to your jury users. Now, as an admin, you'll create accounts for each of your individual jurors, whether that's 1 or 20. And when a juror logs in, they're able to see certain pieces of information about each submission depending on these settings. So if I enable the Show Juror Voting History, this will allow other jurors to see my votes on my submissions. So when they log in, they can look at submission for Jane Doe, and they can see, oh, Andrew voted 5 stars on that yesterday. And so they're able to see each of the other jurors' votes on each individual submission. That's really helpful occasionally. However, we discourage this feature because it may lead to groupthink, where you may be biased. If you see somebody else has rated 5 stars, you may tend to also rate 5 stars just because you've previously seen that. So we recommend leaving that off, but it is an option. Now the second here is randomize order of the submissions. By default, when a user logs in, if this is off, they'll see the submissions in the order they were received. And that typically is not a problem, but oftentimes you'll have your users will submit 2 or 3 entries back to back to back. And if you don't want your users, or rather your jurors, to know which entries belong to which users, you may want to randomize that completely. Third here is hide user details from the jurors. So by default, if this is off, when a juror looks at a submission, they're able to see the first name, the last name, any of the user registration settings that you have set up here, they will also be able to see. If you want to have it completely anonymous, then just hide that. In other words, enable this feature, and that will hide all user registration settings, so they won't be able to see any of that data. They'll just see the submission setting data. Next down here is hide submission fields from jurors. On occasion, there's specific fields that you may want to hide that are information about the submission from the jurors. Maybe you don't want them to be able to see the sale price of the submission because that may influence them on their markings, or maybe you have a student first name and a student last name as part of those submission fields and you want to not show that. So you can then enable and disable whatever fields you want them to see as far as submission fields there. Next, you can change the max voting stars. Default is 5. That usually suffices for most calls. However, you're able to change that anywhere between 2 and 10. And the last setting here is for advanced scoring, and that's what we call Juror Scorecard. If you enable Juror Scorecard, you can set up each individual criteria and then have a star rating for scorecard. Note that if you do enable Juror Scorecard, it overrides this default 5-star and uses instead your criteria. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this off for now, and I'm going to show you how each of these are affected. So I'm going to turn on, yes, I want to see the history. No, I don't want randomize. No, I don't want to hide anything. And no, I don't want to hide any submission fields. And I'll go ahead and say update those settings. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to log in as a juror so you can see what it looks like for them. To add jurors, you would come down here to the tools and say add new user. This is where you would set up your user jurors in attendance. So I've already got several jurors in place here, so I'm just going to log into this last juror here. I'm going to log into his account, and now I'm logged in as if I was him. So here you can see it shows me the star here, shows me previous votes. So this is all the jury history. Here I can see all the information about the user. I can see their first name and last name, and here I can see all the information about the submission. You just click these boxes to enable these and it'll pull up the details about that. I can also see the average, how many votes has been placed on each of these, and a few other details about the entry. So I would come in here as a juror and I would say, okay, I want to rate this thing 4 stars. I can optionally add a note and I can say submit jury rating. And once I vote here, that rating then, that submission disappears from my pending and it shows up down in my voted submissions. We'll have another video tutorial which overviews the entire jury process. So now I want to switch back to the admin user, and I'm going to come back to those jury settings, and I'm going to disable this, and I'm going to turn on this. So I don't want to show voting history, and I also want to hide the user details, and maybe I want to hide the title of the piece as well. I'll go ahead and update that. I'm going to go back to here to Tools. I'm going to re-log in as that juror user again. And now you can see this time I can't turn on those user fields. I can't see first name and last name. I can't see the juror average votes and how many jurors have voted. And if I see the details, notice the title is now hidden from me as well. So that's how those settings affect the jury process. Let's switch back one last time and make a modification this time in the jury settings to the scorecard. So I'm going to enable the scorecard here, and I'll set up a few new criteria. So I'll say add new scorecard criteria, and I'll give this first one a name. And here I'm just going to say technical merit, and I'm going to rate this maybe 5 stars. And this description I'll just leave this same as well. Technical merit. And I'll add one more here. So here's a new criteria. I'll call this one artistic merit. And I'll maybe give this one 8 stars. And I'll call this artistic. And again, you can leave both of these at 5, which would probably be more typical, but I'm going to set them different just to show you that you can have different star ratings for each individual scorecard criteria. I'll just have 2 for now. I'm going to update those jury settings. Now, because I have an 8 and a 5, those are essentially going to override the overall 5. So essentially my overall possible points for each entry would be 13 in this case. So I'm going to go ahead and update the jury settings, and I'll go re-log in now as a user, or sorry, as a juror. So I'll head back here to the tools. I'll come down here to juror 2 and log in as juror 2. And you can see now when juror 2 goes to vote or jury each individual entry, I have a technical merit and I have an artistic merit. And so he can hover over here and choose 3 there, and he can hover over here and choose 6.5 here, and then an optional note, and go ahead and submit that jury rating. Now a juror can also change their votes. They can head back to their voted submissions, and they're able to modify and change their votes up until that jury end date. After the jury end date, they're not able to make any changes to their jurying process. And that's the basics of the initial category here in the jury settings.